This is a bit more complicated than before. The Reilly family that lived in this house, a man called John Reilly came to live here in about 1820, and he was from Drumlane originally, and he didn't know the Derrick Arrow at the beginning, but in 1821 there's a census of Butlersbridge, the census for Ireland. An awful lot of them were lost when the custom house was destroyed in 1921. But the fragments for the census of 1821 for Butlersbridge village, for some reason, has been saved. And there's a lot of information, not at all, but some of it. And there is information about Butlersbridge and the people who lived in here. And from all the townlands, Boylan, the village, Kilnadlair, Tullybuck, I can't remember all the different, but they exist there. And this John Reilly is described in it as a farmer and hatter. And so that was the extent of his economic abilities at that time. He later became a landowner. He owned a lot of land around here. He owned a lot of land around the village. He owned a lot of land down at Rivery. He owned land way up at Lavey, and he eventually began to own. There was a mill over at where Downs is, or Samantha Downs. I don't know their family surname now. Was there Armstrongs? And he also did roadworks for the council at the time. And he also had potatoes. He had a huge amount of potatoes that he used to supply the workhouse with. He died in 1861, and on the Anglo-Celt, his funeral was described that 300 of his workers went ahead of his hearse of the cortege to his burial place in Drumlane. So there were 300 of his workers at that time. Either they were actually workers or past workers. But he was obviously a man that was a huge influence on the economy of Butlersbridge. Now, he was also very strong in his religious ethos. He supported all of the churches. There isn't a church that was built, at that time, we'll come to it later, there was an awful lot of churches built around the county. And in all of the submissions of lists of people who gave money, you'll find John and Eli, I think her name, she was Elizabeth in the long, they used to call her Eliza. You'll find her that they were contributors of fivers and tenors, which is substantial funds at the time. He was succeeded by his son Thomas when he died in 1861. And Thomas, he was equally prominent in the locality, and he was very much involved with the tenant. We have records of him being involved with the tenant right meetings. He was on the board of guardians. He was a rate collector, and there was a drainage scheme for the Erin which involved the drainage of the rivers and I presume the lakes as well. I'm not entirely sure what the Erin drainage scheme, but he was secretary of that. He was also the secretary of the fundraising committee, treasurer of the fundraising committee for the building of the chapel in 1863. He went up for tender in 1861, and I think he was the treasurer or secretary, I'm not sure which. I think it was the secretary. Now, he married the daughter, a society girl. She was McFadden from Cavan. Her father was a doctor. Her name was Sarah. And they occupied here after his father died, along with the mother Eliza. And when Thomas died, and when Eliza died, and when Sarah died, the strength or the bind of their to the community was that the three of them were buried inside the chapel grounds. Let me see now. When I say they were complicated in this sense of the word, that they seemed to be very much loyal to the locals and loyal to everybody, but they seemed also to be able to keep in with the landlord. And when the Earl of Lansborough, the railways didn't start in Cavan until 1856. In 1852, the Countess and the Count of Lansborough came through the village here. Actually 161 years to this day, tomorrow, the 4th of August. And when they arrived, there were banners across the road here, and they had it Lansborough, it said Cade Mead of Fortune. On the other side of it said the tenants, they called him the tenant's friend. And up at the bridge entrance there, they had a banner, "May blessings attend you." So the tenants of all the farmers around here, the monies were paid to this Lord Lansborough, and the tenants met his coach and horses out the road, and they actually disentangled the horses from the coach, and the tenants carried the coach carried the Lord and into the village themselves by hand as a mark of respect to him. So they grovelled a wee bit as well, as they were grovelling to the landlord, as well as being very good at the church to the locals. So they were keeping in the middle of the road. What do we see? And the speeches, if you heard the speeches, they're in the book. I won't be talking about my book. The speeches that they read out, or that they gave to the Lord as a welcome. Well, you never saw such grovelling as you got. It really was enough to make you sick. So anyway, that was 160. That was 161 years this weekend. So up the lane here, John Reilly, when he died, his removal would have been from a chapel that was up this lane here. Just beyond the bend on the right-hand side was the second chapel in Butlersbridge. We'll come to the chapels in a minute, but just to remember where the chapel was, it's up the end of after the curve in this lane on the right-hand side. And his removal and his funeral mass would have been from that chapel. There was a reference by Reverend Cunningham to a friend of his, Father Smith, and he said that this friend of his, this Father Smith, he said, would have said mass, he said, in John Reilly's shed. So it was our chapel, but it was referred to by other people as John Reilly's shed. But that was after they left the chapel. There was a chapel up in Culbeo, and then they came down to here, and after the shed, our chapel was closed, then they moved to our jewel across the river. So where do we see now where we're going after that? Yeah, another item associated with this lane is the famine. According to Norby Fitzpatrick, there was during the famine, there was supposed to be Indian corn distributed to the local people from John Reilly's as well. And that Indian corn was dangerous in other cases. It was sold often as corn, and there was all extraneous stuff mixed in with it. Some people got more sick by it than were cured by it. So, and also beyond here, up this lane, we'll be leaving here in a minute, we're stuck here for a while, but beyond here there used to be a coursing event occurred here every year after the war until 1955. Behind Andrew Boylan's house, which then was John Reilly's, but this is in Andrew Boylan's father's time, there was a coursing event here. It used to be held in Lord Farnham's, and then it came to the Butlersbridge, and it stayed here until 1951 to 52. And you had 500 or 700 people here. They used to come in every day to it. It was over 2 or 3 days. Some of the events that they had were the Derry Garrett Stakes, the Kinnaleg Stakes. They would call the different events after local town lands and people who owned the dogs and that. Danny Smith had a Danny Smith, who's Con is right. Smith's donor, it'd be Donor's granddad. He had a license for it. He used to run a little bar over there on the 2 days. And all the locals were involved, catching the hares, building them up, mining them for the big day. It was a huge event, and they came from several counties around. So that's what we have here. The last thing we have here before we move is the concrete hut here behind us. And that was during the war. I know it doesn't look much, it isn't much. We won't ask anyone for our personal memories of their events in the concrete hut. No, don't go there. And I'm not talking to anybody in particular, Paddy. I would have got you. But anyway, that was built during the Second World War, they were not going to rehearse the Second World War and our independence. But there was a fear that either the Germans or the English would invade Ireland. And in fact, the bridge was, John Wilson showed me when I was a young fella, the bridge was holed over there. There was a few of the big stones taken out of the bridge to blow it up in case that they would explode in case the English or the Germans would come through. But this was a local outpost, and it was manned by the local defence force, the LDF. And the LDF, they used to train up in Ballymackenroe and used to shooting practice up there. And they had a green coats and trousers and boots and all the rest of it. A lot of people said that people joined just to get the boots and the garb, but that was unfair because actually if there had been an attack, there would have been on the line. So I think we're finished here. I think we'll cross over now to Mary Tierney's home.